my name is Jennifer Kaman, and I am giving this presentation as part of the requirements for my Human Services 508 class at Liberty University. Next slide. On this slide, you will see a list of what we will review today. You can go ahead and feel free to pause here and take a look. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and continue. Next slide. In the book Bridges Not Walls, a book about interpersonal communication, John Stewart tells us that interpersonal communication gives and receives information. This giving and receiving of information emphasizes a person's uniqueness, or what makes a person who they are, their responsiveness, how well a person is receiving the message that is being shared, their reflectiveness, how a person internalizes the message that is being shared, and their addressability. Stewart also emphasizes that communication can be bad or good depending on the situation. Next slide. James Peterson, in the book entitled Why Don't We Listen Better? Communicating and Connecting in Relationships, says interpersonal communication happens when people share information and connect with others. He discusses two levels of communication. Level 1, communicating, gives and receives information and discusses points of view. This is your basic surface communication that occurs with everyday conversation and people you are building relationships with. Level 2 communication is deeper than words. It helps people move to a more satisfying relationship. In Level 2 communication, trust, intimacy, and personal sharing are developed. Next slide. S. Ramaraju, who is a research scholar at Anna University in Chennai, India, states, "The heart of interpersonal communication is shared meaning between two people. We don't just exchange words when we communicate. Instead, we create meanings as we figure out what each other's words and behaviors stand for, represent, or imply. Meanings grow out of histories of interactions between unique persons." Next slide. Now that we have a definition of interpersonal communication, we can discuss what enlarging the conversation is and what it entails. To me, enlarging the conversation means adding to the conversation in a meaningful way. This means providing a safe environment for a person to speak, understanding what a person is trying to communicate, being non-judgmental, and asking clarifying questions. Next slide. From what I have learned, what are my overarching goals? The top two on my list are to listen and communicate in a way that will maximize the conversation and to communicate at Peterson's definition of a level 2 communicator. This means I want to be sure that I am always enlarging the conversation and trying to build a relationship with the person I am communicating with. I will discuss more about these goals later on in the presentation, but first let's take a look at who I am. Next slide. The results of my Uniquely You assessment listed me as a CIS. Next slide. The more positive attributes of a CIS include being more passive than active, non-confrontational, possessing strong people skills, being both outgoing and reserved, friendly, enthusiastic, cordial, not aggressive or pushy, unless people are trying to get me to do something that I don't want to, and I prefer peace and harmony. Next slide. In contrast, I do unfortunately possess some negative qualities. These include being an emotional roller coaster, struggling with melancholy, thinking too much which leads to worrying, being negative and critical, not being dominant or demanding, needing to please everyone, and needing more guidance when finishing a project due to my inability to take initiative. Next slide. This leads me to ask how my behavioral blend positively and negatively influences my conversation. On the positive side, I usually do what I am told. This means I am fairly dependable. I also relate well with others and respond to a person's needs in ways that other people may not necessarily see or do. I can avoid and resolve conflict. Next slide. My negative attributes can negatively influence my conversation as well. Because I am non-confrontational, issues that are bothering me are kept inside until I explode. My husband will be the first to tell you that that is true. People also tend to get annoyed with my inability to make a decision. Finally, my lack of initiative hinders my ability to become a true leader. Next slide. Potential barriers that I foresee with my communication include, but are not limited to, being the rescuer, not being confrontational, and various noise pollution that can interfere with my communication. Burley Allen defines the rescuer as someone who takes another person's personal problem and makes them their own. It is like a rescuer needs to be needed. This can lead to emotional overload, where a rescuer can feel emotionally drained from the needs of others. Another potential barrier that I have identified would be my lack of confrontation. This can lead to what Peterson describes as flat brain syndrome. This occurs when our stomachs expand with an overload of mixed emotions. This causes our stomach to press the heart function into bricks in our chest, which sends our relating abilities south on us. The upward expansion flattens brains against the top of our skulls, forcing our thinking, hearing, and seeing off kilter. When flat-brained, we can't hear well, see accurately, think straight, or act sensibly. This can lead to an explosive conversation where communication does not occur. Next slide. Another potential barrier is noise pollution. OneLook.com defines noise pollution as annoying and potentially harmful environmental noise. Noise pollution can be both internal and external. As it applies to communication, internal noise pollution can include formulating our reply while the other person is talking, being preoccupied with internal matters, thinking about plans for later, or any other thought process that prevents us from hearing the speaker. External noise pollution includes straining to hear the other person's mannerisms that are distracting, loud noises outside, the temperature of the room, things happening outside the window or the door, the person who is listening, doodling, or talking, chewing gum, or eating while having a conversation. Next slide. What can we do about these barriers? Burley Allen suggests that we practice listening with a planned purpose. I suggest regular reflection to examine how I feel internally, to ensure emotions are not building and nothing is bothering me. And also, this will try to remove while I'm communicating, I would like to try to remove as many distractions as possible. Next slide. Let's go back to my overarching goals and discuss how I plan to achieve them. The first one, as you remember, was to listen and communicate in a way that will maximize conversation. To accomplish this, I plan to practice, practice, practice. Practice makes perfect, and since listening is an acquired skill, it is something that needs to be practiced. Also, to achieve this goal, I plan on regularly reviewing myself as a listener through journaling and administering Burley Allen's listening assessment exercise. This will help me gauge whether I am listening at the level that will maximize the conversations I am having. For my second goal, which was to communicate at Peterson's definition of a level 2 communicator, I plan on observing people who I believe possess good communication skills and to emulate them in my communication. I also plan to practice being non-judgmental and to listen to clarify a situation and not to attack. Next slide. It is my hope that the things I have learned in Human Services 508 become things I will use in my life. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation today.